the day America fooled Hitler's entire army. In the final year of World War II, as the world braced for the largest invasion in human history, a small group of Americans prepared for a mission so strange it sounded like fiction. They weren't training with rifles or studying battlefield maps. They weren't rehearsing how to storm beaches or break through fortified lines. Their assignment was something almost unbelievable. Their job was to create an army that didn't exist. An army built out of air, rubber, paint, and imagination. Across the fields of southern England, rows of Sherman tanks rose from the ground. But they made no sound. They weighed almost nothing. A single man could lift one with both hands. These weren't machines of war. They were inflatable decoys, giant balloons shaped and painted to fool German reconnaissance pilots watching from above. This strange unit, officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, was unlike anything the U.S. Army had ever created. It was made up of artists, designers, stage builders, sound engineers, and radio illusion specialists. They weren't trained to destroy the enemy, they were trained to deceive him. Their mission was clear: convince Hitler that the Allied invasion would strike at a completely wrong location. If the Germans discovered the truth, thousands of real soldiers could die. But if the Ghost Army succeeded, the path to D-Day would open. This is the story of how America used paintbrushes, air pumps, and pure creativity to fool one of the most feared military machines in history, and made the Nazis believe America had invisible tanks. The men who formed the Ghost Army did not come from traditional military backgrounds. Many had never stepped inside a factory, let alone driven a tank. They came from art schools, advertising agencies, Broadway stages, and city studios. One had painted movie backdrops in Hollywood. Another designed posters for New York theaters. Some were sculptors or illustrators. Others were sound technicians who understood how to create emotion, using nothing more than audio. The Army handpicked them for a purpose that required creativity, not firepower. These men were asked to fight a different kind of battle, one that depended not on bullets, but on perception. They needed to think like artists, act like soldiers, and deceive like magicians. The Ghost Army's strength came from these unusual talents. A painter could replicate tank shadows with frightening realism. A designer could build fake headquarters that looked authentic from the air. A sound engineer could create the rumble of an approaching armored division using giant speakers and a handful of recorded tracks. They trained in complete secrecy. Their families had no idea what they were doing. Their work was hidden behind locked doors and sealed documents. The stakes were enormous. If their illusions failed, the Germans would know exactly where the Allies planned to land. And if that happened, the Normandy invasion might not just fail, it could collapse before it even began. But these men embraced the challenge. They understood that wars are not always won by the strongest armies. Sometimes wars are won by the smartest illusions. They accepted that their brushes, pens, tools, and speakers were now weapons, and they prepared to use them with the same courage as the soldiers who carried rifles into battle. The Ghost Army's mission required precision that bordered on perfection. They were tasked with building a full-scale replica of an American armored division, not a small camp, not a few fake tanks. An entire military force, complete with infantry, artillery, headquarters, supply depots, and motor pools. Everything had to look real, act real, and sound real. It needed to convince German intelligence experts who analyzed every shadow, every tire track, every shape on every aerial photograph. This operation wasn't a trick. It was an art form, layered on top of a military strategy. The Ghost Army staged scenes like directors preparing a set. They created tire tracks using heavy rollers. They arranged inflatable tanks at angles that matched standard Army doctrine. They hung laundry to suggest large groups of soldiers. They built fake mess halls and fake fuel depots. Even the spacing between tents mattered. If tents were too close together, the Germans would know. If they were too far apart, the illusion would break. They worked mostly at night to avoid being spotted by ground patrols. Convoys of trucks moved silently through the darkness, carrying rolled-up rubber tanks and canvas vehicles. At sunrise, the field would look like an armored division had camped there for days, and by sunset, the next day, the entire force could vanish into thin air, leaving behind an empty field that had looked alive with activity only hours earlier. This team had to outthink the enemy. They studied German reconnaissance patterns, learned to replicate American movement patterns, and mastered the art of deception at a level that had never been attempted before. Everything had a purpose. Everything contributed to a single objective: lead Hitler to believe the invasion would strike at Calais, not Normandy. At first glance, an inflatable tank sounds almost laughable. But the Ghost Army didn't treat them like toys. They treated them like weapons. Each inflatable Sherman was designed with astonishing detail. Painters added fake weld lines. They painted shadows beneath gun barrels. They added smudges, dust marks, and tiny imperfections so convincing that German analysts studying photographs couldn't tell the difference between rubber and steel. When the unit arrived at a new location, they transformed empty ground into an armored camp in a matter of hours. Dozens of men carried folded rubber tanks like oversized tents. They spread them out across the field. Then, with hand pumps, air hoses, and compressors, the tanks rose from the earth. 1 minute, the ground was bare. The next, it looked like Patton's armored division was preparing for war. From above, these vehicles cast the correct shadows. Their shapes were accurate. Their spacing was textbook military alignment. Even their wear patterns looked authentic. The Ghost Army studied how real tank units positioned their equipment, how soldiers walked between them, how maintenance areas appeared from the sky. They recreated everything with staggering accuracy. And if a German plane flew overhead, the men acted. They crouched near the tanks. They walked between them with clipboards. They pretended to refuel them. They created the illusion of life, movement, and readiness. But the moment the plane disappeared, the laughter sometimes returned. They knew the absurdity of lifting a tank with one hand, but they also knew these illusions were saving real lives. Every successful deception meant fewer soldiers facing enemy fire on the beaches of France. And that made every inflatable tank, every rubber machine of war, worth the effort. Visual deception wasn't enough. German scouts didn't just watch, they listened. They monitored the low rumble of engines, the clatter of metal tracks, and the grinding of tanks preparing to move. So the Ghost Army built one of the first large-scale sound warfare systems in history. They used massive speakers mounted on half-tracks. These speakers blasted recorded tank noises across open fields, bouncing sound off trees, hills, and buildings. Engineers captured authentic audio from real tank battalions, the roar of engines starting, the clanking of treads on metal ramps, the rhythmic growl of columns moving across dirt. At night, villagers miles away reported hearing the unmistakable movement of armored vehicles, to German intelligence units listening through microphones and patrols nearby. It sounded like hundreds of tanks were assembling for battle. But in reality, the entire sound came from a few artists operating turntables and amplifiers. The Ghost Army manipulated distance by adjusting volume and reverb. They created illusions of troop movements by layering soundtracks. They simulated convoys shifting positions, artillery preparing fire missions, and even fake construction crews setting up bridges. Sound became a weapon, a psychological tool, a way to sell the illusion that a massive invasion force waited just beyond the horizon. This was warfare redesigned. Instead of bullets, they fired noise. Instead of artillery, they launched echoes across empty fields. And the Germans believed every second of it. German intelligence had a weakness. They trusted radio signals. They recorded everything. They analyzed patterns, tones, timing, even the unique habits of individual radio operators. The Ghost Army used this to their advantage. They created entire networks of fake radio chatter. Dozens of men became voice actors, mimicking real units. They studied authentic army communication to learn how officers spoke, how sergeants reported positions, how clerks relayed supply requests. Then they performed those roles over the airwaves, transmitting messages that sounded routine, but were completely fabricated. German analysts heard the chatter and believed real units were in the area. They intercepted weather updates, supply orders, personnel reports, maintenance logs, and tactical discussions, none of which actually existed. The Ghost Army went as far as forging the unique handwriting of specific operators. Every radio specialist has a style, a rhythm, a fingerprint. The Germans knew these patterns, so the Ghost Army learned them too. A single operator could pretend to be an entire battalion's worth of radio personnel. One man might play the role of 6 officers. Another might switch voices mid-transmission to simulate multiple soldiers. They layered messages, faked urgency, staged boredom, simulated frustration. every human emotion that normally comes across in radio work. The Germans never suspected a thing. To them, these were American units preparing for a major offensive. To the Ghost Army, it was another night of flawless acting. By the spring of 1944, everything came down to one goal: mislead Hitler about where the Allies would land. The real invasion point was Normandy, but the Germans believed the Allies were more likely to attack Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. The Allies used that belief as a weapon. The Ghost Army built a fake invasion force near Dover. They created an entire world of illusions. Inflatable tanks lined fields, dummy landing craft filled the coastline, fake barracks buzzed with scripted activity, fake officers inspected fake troops, and radio networks spread thousands of lines of fabricated communication into the night. German reconnaissance pilots captured photos of these camps and rushed them to analysts. The images suggested that Patton's First Army Group, believed by the Germans to be the main Allied strike force, was amassing weapons near Dover. And because Patton was considered the Allies' most aggressive commander, the Germans trusted what they saw. Hitler took the bait. He moved his elite panzer units, Germany's most powerful armored forces, to Calais, expecting a massive invasion there. He weakened Normandy's defenses. He thinned out artillery along the beaches. He ordered key units to remain in Calais even after the real invasion had begun. The Ghost Army had succeeded. Their illusions shaped Hitler's strategy, and the consequences would change the war forever. When Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, every single minute mattered. The German response needed to be fast, coordinated, and overwhelming. But it wasn't. The German high command was confused. Their armored divisions were out of position. Their reinforcements were locked near Calais, far from the real battlefield. The deception had worked. As American, British, and Canadian troops fought to break through fortified lines, they faced fewer tanks than expected, fewer artillery batteries, fewer reinforcements. German commanders hesitated, believing the Normandy landing might be a diversion. For hours and even days, they waited for what they thought was the real invasion at Calais. That hesitation saved thousands of lives. The Ghost Army's illusions had bought precious time for soldiers to move inland, time for supplies to reach the beaches, time for airborne divisions to secure critical positions. Historians estimate that the success of the D-Day landings was heavily influenced by the Germans being misled. The Ghost Army never fired a shot. They never stormed a beach, but their work painted tanks. Fake radio networks, sound warfare, may have been one of the most important contributions to the victory in Normandy. War is often measured in terms of destruction, but sometimes the greatest victories come from deception. Quiet, unseen, and unbelievably effective. For decades after the war, the world had no idea the Ghost Army existed. The men returned home like ordinary soldiers. They blended back into their lives as artists, teachers, designers, and engineers. They won no medals. They received no public recognition. Their families couldn't even know what they had done. The entire program remained classified until the 1990s. Only then did historians uncover the truth. A small unit of creative young men had helped change the course of the war using nothing but deception and imagination. Veterans finally shared stories they had kept quiet for half a century. Tales of inflatable tanks, nights spent blasting recordings into dark forests, days spent painting shadows onto rubber machinery, moments where discovery meant death, but success meant saving thousands of lives. The world finally understood what these men had accomplished. Their mission wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of war that fills monuments or textbooks, but it was brilliant, innovative, fearless, and it proved something powerful. War isn't won only by brute strength. Sometimes it's won by people who think differently. Their legacy became a reminder that creativity can be just as heroic as courage, and that deception done for the right reason, at the right time, can save more lives than any weapon ever could. Today, modern militaries still study the Ghost Army. Their techniques, visual decoys, sound deception, and fake radio networks are still used in conflicts around the world. Inflatable tanks now appear on battlefields from Eastern Europe to the Middle East. Sound cannons create the illusion of distant artillery. Electronic warfare units mimic entire battalions through crafted signals. But the original story remains unmatched. A group of young artists, designers, and engineers stepped into a war and used creativity as their shield. They built an army made of air, but its impact was solid as steel. Their illusions confused one of the most feared intelligence machines on the planet. Their tricks helped secure the success of the most important invasion of the 20th century. And the truth is this: you don't need to fire a bullet to change history. Sometimes, you just need to imagine something no one else would dare attempt. If you want more unbelievable but true stories like this, stories hidden from textbooks, stories that shaped America, stories that show how ordinary people changed the world, make sure you subscribe, because the next one is even more unbelievable than this.